Men have been battling each other in the skies for 3/4 of a century. Video ordnance will examine the weapon in these struggles, the fighter aircraft. The fighter is a machine both lethal and beautiful. It is the most versatile of modern combat aircraft. It can be used to fight other aircraft or to attack targets on the ground. Traveling at speeds up to 1,500 miles per hour, the modern fighter is armed with a deadly assortment of guns, missiles, and bombs. They operate in the most hostile conditions, over the sea, in the dark, and on the edge of space. A mystique of glamour and adventure clings to fighter pilots as to no other soldiers. But contrary to their popular image as devil-may-care adventurers, today's fighter pilots require an extraordinary amount of technological prowess as well. Their aggressiveness in the sky must be tempered by the patience to learn the intricacies of their aircraft. The mating of man and machine takes years of training and practice and costs about $1 million per pilot. No Air Force is willing to waste that kind of money on an immature hotshot. Glenn Larson flew F-4 Phantom fighters during the Vietnam War, and he now test flies America's hottest new fighter aircraft.
I think I would typify the fighter pilot that you're asking about as an individual who has the ability to think on his own, to respond to a rapidly changing situation properly, to respond in a proper tactical sense, to identify a flaw in an enemy's tactics and to take advantage of it, or if that flaw disappears halfway through, to change your tactics, to be flexible, and to operate in an autonomous fashion. There are a lot of guys that can fly airplanes, but there are not that many that can fly and think well while they're doing
it. Today's fighter aircraft come in a bewildering variety of shapes and sizes, with price tags running from $15 million to $50 million. Many air forces operate several types of fighters. In the United States Air Force, the bantamweight F-16 Fighting Falcon fulfills the requirements of a strike fighter. Its specialty is ground attack, but its high maneuverability makes it a ferocious close-range dogfighter. The United States Air Force also operates the F-15 Eagle. The Eagle is a larger fighter than the F-16, and its specialty is aerial combat. It has a more powerful radar to seek out enemy fighters at great distances, and carries a wider selection of weapons. Like the Air Force's F-16, the Navy's F-18 Hornet strike fighter can attack ground targets or aircraft. Navy fighters must be built to withstand the forces of a carrier's steam catapult, which hurls the fighters off the deck at nearly 150 miles per hour. Carrier fighters must also be heavily reinforced to absorb the severe shock of landing on the deck of an aircraft carrier. A Navy fighter will make its landing at about 125 miles per hour and come to a screeching halt in only a few seconds. The Hornet's bigger brother is the F-14 Tomcat. The Tomcat is the Navy's counterpart of the F-15 Eagle. It is designed for very long-range aerial combat. Its large size is needed to carry a more powerful radar and the long-range Phoenix missiles. The Tomcat can simultaneously locate and attack up to 6 enemy aircraft from nearly 100 miles away. The Falklands War saw the first use of a new kind of fighter, the Harrier vertical takeoff jet. It can take off from very small carriers, as seen here, using a special ski ramp at the front of the ship. More remarkably, it can take off and land vertically. On land, it requires only a tiny clearing for its airfield. This unique feature is made possible by a special engine. The engine has 4 exhaust nozzles that can be steered to change the direction of the aircraft. It can taxi like an ordinary aircraft if the runway is available, but if there is no runway, the pilot can aim the nozzles of the jet engines downwards toward the ground and take off vertically. The Harrier was the workhorse of both the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy during the Falklands War. It proved equally versatile in dogfighting and in ground attack. An improved version of this unique fighter is also built in the United States for the U.S. Marine Corps. Perhaps the most obvious distinction between the classic fighters of World War I and today's combat aircraft is speed. A modern fighter can fly at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, or nearly 1,500 miles per hour. Fighter speeds have increased steadily since World War II. In fighter combat, there are advantages to high speeds, but there are also penalties to be paid.
If you can come in faster than the other guy, get your missile off faster, and get out of there, you'll probably have the advantage. But at what cost? It's going to take a tremendous amount of fuel, tremendous upgrade in propulsion systems and engines that don't exist today. Speed is not as important as it used to be, but it still is important. I don't want to downplay that.
One of the penalties of high-speed maneuvering is the tremendous pressure called G-force, which is exerted on the pilot. These forces can be so severe that the pilot will black out and lose consciousness. Lieutenant Commander Tom Sobiak serves as executive officer of the U.S. Navy's elite Top Gun School. He explains the nature of G-force.
G-force is the gravitational pull, or like the gravitational pull of the Earth. An equivalent to 1G is what, if you're standing upright, that's 1G, or laying down, that's 1G. But when you go through the air and you change your motion, the blood in your head is going to try and move down. Your heart is going to try and pump it up to your brain and to your eyes. But this gravitational pull is going to pull all this fluid in your face and your mask and your helmet and everything. It's going to pull on your body, and you have to grunt. They built G-suits, which fill up with air. Actually, the English, I believe, came up with it. They started out with water, and they have these little bladders in your legs, down here around your calf and on your thighs, and on your abdomen. And they used to sit on this bag of water. And when you pulled G, you'd sit down further in the seat and force this water into these bladders, which would squeeze your legs and squeeze your belly and help force that blood back up into your brain. Now they have air that does that. And this thing fits tight, and you learn to grunt and flex your muscles and make those veins and arteries as small as possible so that the heart will keep that pressure up there and keep the blood up in the brain.
Training and experience make pilots aware of the limits of their aircraft and their bodies during high-speed flight. Aggressive maneuvering means high G-forces, and a pilot must know how much stress he and his plane can withstand.
From my experience, however, I can handle 6 Gs okay for a while. 7 Gs not very long. 8 Gs just a little while. 9 Gs, forget it. That hurts. That's very painful. So perhaps we have reached the physical limits, but there are things that we can do to enhance the pilot's ability to withstand that.
By today's standards, the celebrated dogfights of World War II seem to occur in slow motion. At 300 miles per hour, they seem more like a deadly aerial ballet than aerial combat. Fighters then were armed only with machine guns, and combat took place at ranges of under 1,000 feet. Jet fighter aircraft changed the speed of dogfights, but a pilot's talents remain much the same. Lieutenant Commander Sobiak of Top Gun comments on the changeless character of air combat.
If you study history, a lot of the top aces of World War II were people that picked somebody out of the crowd that was lagging back, not staying with the rest of them, and somebody that they could sneak up on, arrive unannounced, so to speak, and deliver his weapon. And that has not changed. You always want to beware of the guy that you can't see or that you don't see, even if you're looking for him.
Colonel Francis Gabreski was the top American ace over Europe in World War II and a jet ace over Korea.
The pilot himself must make himself an outstanding pilot. He's got to be aggressive, he's got to know his equipment, and he's got to have good eyesight. Well, the situation that we are confronted with today with the advent technological developments that we've had since World War II, it's been, you know, like 43 years, and what a tremendous amount of progress. First of all, you have speeds that are incredible. You're talking about Mach 1, you're talking about Mach 2, when you were evaluating your speed at 300 miles an hour in World War II. I would hate to think of being a fighter pilot today, because I think that the fighter pilot today is going to be a lot busier than we were during World War II or during the Korean conflict, because there's so many more things to think about. The surface-to-air missile, and even the flexibility of armament system that you have at your disposal. You have the gun, you have the Sidewinder, you have the Sparrow, and in some categories like the F-14, you have the Phoenix missile. So the cockpit of a present fighter is so cluttered with lights that indicate, like your raw gear, which is your radar warning panel. I mean, it itself lights up as the SAM, surface-to-air missiles, fired from the ground, and as it's coming up to destroy you, I mean, it alerts you. If you're not looking into the cockpit at that particular time, you don't see it, and if you don't see it coming in from underneath, behind you, you're a lost cause.
Sophisticated electronics and weaponry, along with high speeds, have added a layer of complexity to the arena of air combat. In the confusion of air battles, this is sometimes more than a single pilot can handle. There have been a variety of attempts to ease his task.
It takes two people to operate the F-4 radar. One guy to fly the airplane, and another guy to operate the radar to do such tasks as operate the gain of the receiver, the antenna positioning and things like that. The F-15's advanced radar allows it to be done by one man because all of that is automated.
This is a computer-simulated view from the cockpit of America's newest fighter, the F-18 Hornet. For a pilot, one of the most noticeable innovations in the new generation of fighters is the heads-up display. Glenn Larson now tests the world's hottest new fighters. He explains the importance of this new feature.
Well, a HUD is something that has come into being most recently, I guess with the F-15, later the F-18, the F-16. It's what's called a heads-up display. And the idea is to get the pilot's head out of the cockpit so that he's looking through the windscreen to see what's going on in the air battle or on the ground or whatever it is that he's aiming at. Now let's draw some contrasts. The F-4, for example, has a gun sight, as did the F-100 and the F-104 and the F-86, go back as far as you want. They all have gun sights. And this normally takes the form of a small circle with a dot in the middle. And that's your aiming device for whether it be dropping bombs or shooting the gun or whatever it may be. That's adjustable, of course. It depresses up and down so you can get the right angles. And that's all they had for years. The newer heads-up displays combine that together with a tremendous amount of information the pilot always needs. In the air-to-air arena, it's especially nice because there's a little device called a target designator box. And one of the biggest problems a fighter pilot has is seeing the enemy aircraft. If I can see an aircraft before he can see me, I can beat him. I don't care what I'm flying. This box is tied in with the radar such that when you're locked onto a target, this little box comes up on the field of view of the HUD, and if you look through it, that's where the enemy aircraft is. It adds to that thing they call situation awareness. It helps you understand better what's going on. More importantly, displayed up on that heads-up display in the air-to-air area are all the release parameters for the weapons. For example, an AIM-7 radar-guided missile has a certain range, and if you fire outside of that range, the missile won't get there. That's displayed to the pilot right up there with all that airspeed and everything else. In the F-4, it's down hidden in the radar scope. You have to come inside and try to find it.
The premier weapon in air combat from the dogfights of World War I through World War II and Korea was the machine gun. The biplane fighters of World War I were usually armed with 2 machine guns which fired through the propeller blades. They were effective to a range of about 300 feet. The larger fighters of World War II carried more machine guns and more powerful varieties. The early jet fighters, like those that saw combat over Korea, were armed much the same as World War II fighters. Their advantage was speed, not firepower. But in the late 1950s, the advent of guided missiles allowed fighters to attack each other at ranges measured in miles rather than feet. The first use of guided missiles in air combat came in 1959, when Sabre jets of the Taiwanese Air Force shot down several communist Chinese MiGs with early versions of the Sidewinder missile. There are several categories of dogfighting missiles. For close-range combat, infrared-guided missiles like the Sidewinder are the most common. For ranges beyond human eyesight, radar-guided missiles like the Sparrow or Super 530 are called for. The longest-range missile currently in use is the Phoenix, which can hit aircraft nearly 100 miles away.
Anytime you build a fighter, you would want your adversary to feel threatened as far away as possible. In other words, if you can get him to turn around because he knows that you're there, you've successfully completed your mission, correct? And you didn't have to hurt him. But if he continues to come, you want him to know that you can hurt him all the way into up close and personal with the gun. So you have to have both the gun and missile systems. You want those envelopes to overlap because you are projecting a threat to the adversary, and you want him to be leery of entering your domain. And that means from up close and personal with the gun or a long ways away.
Fighters can also attack ground targets. Specialized attack aircraft, like this A-10 Thunderbolt, are armed with a 30mm GAU-8 cannon that can fire nearly 70 bullets per second. These heavy cannon are so powerful they can even penetrate the thick side armor of a tank. They can also attack with bombs. In fact, modern jet fighters can actually carry more bombs than most World War II bombers. Specialized bombs, like the cluster bomb seen here being dropped by an F-16, can attack large concentrations of trucks and tanks. Guided missiles can also be used to attack ground targets, even small, heavily armored targets like tanks. The Maverick missile has a small infrared guidance camera and computer in its nose, which visually locks onto a target and then guides itself until impact. Fighter aircraft are not invulnerable. The greatest threat they face today is from the ground, from surface-to-air missiles, sometimes called SAMs. SAMs first appeared in the 1960s and have changed the nature of air combat. This Roland radar-guided missile has been locked onto an incoming fighter plane. The fighter is not fitted with electronic warfare devices to bluff the missile. Instead, the fighter tries to outmaneuver the missile, but to no avail.
In 1965, a typical, say, a Phantom, F-4 Phantom, went into combat with only very rudimentary electronic equipment for detecting enemy radars. The same situation occurred in the Middle East. The Israelis had only the very basic electronic equipment, but as they saw the adversary coming up with sophisticated missiles like the SAM-2 and SAM-3 and more advanced models, Russian supplied, it became very important to have sophisticated electronic warfare equipment. And yes, as war continued to increasingly see advanced U.S. and Soviet equipment, the avionics, the electronics, the electronic warfare element became vital in terms of victory. And you saw that where in '73, the most advanced Soviet equipment at that time was in the hands of the Syrians and the Egyptians. SA-6 was one example. The Israelis had no jamming equipment nor radar warning devices to detect this missile, and they suffered many losses as a result of it. But like any move-counter-move, they were able to develop jammers, detection equipment, and new tactics to counter this, and you saw that in '82 when the Lebanon conflict saw Israeli airplanes bombing and successfully destroying over a dozen surface-to-air missile batteries, Syrian-manned, in the Bekaa Valley.
The technological competition between NATO and the Warsaw Pact makes certain that fighter aircraft will continue to evolve in the future. This sleek new Soviet fighter, the MiG-29 Fulcrum, is the latest entry in the duel between the superpowers for air supremacy. The MiG-29 embodies the whole spectrum of advanced technologies found in the fighter planes of the 1980s. Computers, composite materials, radar-guided missiles, and electronic warfare devices. At the moment, a new generation of fighter aircraft is on the drawing boards. The new fighters are likely to incorporate exotic features such as stealth technology to make them electronically invisible to radar. The noted defense analyst, Dr. Norman Friedman, speculates on the forms these advances will take.
There's several new technologies that you have to take into account for fighters. Obviously, one is stealth. Clearly, since no one who can speak about it knows exactly what stealth is, there's a question as to whether it's applicable to a very high-performance airplane. If it is, obviously it's very attractive. If it's not, you may have two categories, one of a very stealthy but relatively low-performance airplane, say a reconnaissance airplane that gets in and out without being seen, the other a very high-performance airplane that can survive in a dogfight. Remember that no matter how stealthy you get, you can still be seen by someone, by his eyeballs, so that you may still want high performance. Now, the other main themes I would think are increasing maneuverability through fly-by-wire, having an airplane which can intelligently maneuver itself, which you would expect very soon, so that it can exceed the limits imposed by the body of its pilot. If you're willing to black out while the thing makes a very tight turn because it knows it will recover, that should make a difference.
Predicting the future of fighter aircraft is a risky business. Few things seem certain. The fighter of the future is likely to be faster, more maneuverable, more electronically sophisticated, and more lethal. And for the short term at least, it will be piloted by humans. The near future is still classified. The future is science fiction.